In my many years in Washington, the most alarming development has been advertised under the soothing title of campaign finance reform. We Americans are disposed to think that the word reform is a synonym for improvement. But what is called campaign finance reform is nothing less than a frontal assault on the first, the most fundamental of our freedoms, the freedom to speak our minds and to participate in politics. This assault is always conducted stealthily by people who pretend that they only want to regulate money, not speech. They say they are only concerned about the quantity of money in politics. After the 2012 Romney and Obama campaigns spent combined $2 billion, the usual cry was heard from reformers. They said, "There is too much money in politics." Forget the fact that Americans spend $2 billion every spring just on Easter candy. But you must remember this. People who say there is too much money in politics are necessarily saying three very sinister things. First, they are saying there is too much political speech. Second, they are saying that they know just the right amount of political speech. And third, they are saying that government should enforce the limits they want on the amount of political speech. That is, the government should regulate speech about the government. Over the last few decades, reformers have chipped away at the First Amendment guarantee of free speech. They've done it with various and sundry campaign finance laws, such as limiting the amount of money an individual can give to a candidate. But they're no longer satisfied with merely chipping away at the First Amendment. Now they want to take a sledgehammer to it. They admit that what they want, to restrict free speech, is incompatible with the Constitution. So, for the first time in American history, reformers, calling themselves progressives, are proposing to change the First Amendment in order to empower Congress to decide the quantity, content, and timing of political speech. And who would benefit from the speech-restricting rules Congress would write? Well, we know this.
The way that he tries to frame this argument, claiming that the government would be limiting speech. Another way that you could actually accurately reword this argument is the people are standing up to the billionaire class and saying, you are not going to have this enormous influence on our political system that you've been having. Notice that this man doesn't mention the Koch brothers, he doesn't mention the DeVos family, he doesn't mention the Wilkes brothers, who fund Prager University and donated $15 million to the campaign of Ted Cruz. He tries to frame this argument as if money actually is free speech. If money was actually free speech, then wouldn't that mean that those that were born into the most advantageous situations, that they get potentially 1 billion times the free speech that other American citizens get? The Koch brothers literally inherited $1 billion. They're already trying to buy the political system, and they've done a pretty good job with it. The idea that they should be able to spend unlimited amounts of money influencing our political system is ridiculous. This is part of the reason why a lot of action hasn't been done on topics like climate change. It's because the Koch brothers and individuals like them buy off these politicians by funding their campaigns, and then these politicians are obligated to them.
Or ever will exist, has been or will be written by incumbent legislators. That is, all laws regulating campaigns will favor the re-election of incumbents. Incumbents have enormous electoral advantages stemming from their perquisites of office, name recognition, a catalog of favors done for constituents, and so on. Hence, incumbents generally do not need to spend as much money as their challengers must spend. Hence, incumbents write laws making fundraising more difficult. Those who advocate restricting how much money we can contribute to candidates or how much money candidates can spend on campaigns always say the same thing. They say we are only restricting money, and money is not speech. To see how silly this distinction is, consider the following. The New York Times constantly says that money is not speech, and therefore the spending of money can be restricted without restricting freedom of speech. But suppose conservatives controlled Congress and said to the New York Times, "We, of course, would never restrict the freedom of the Times to practice journalism, heaven forbid. We are only going to restrict the amount of money the Times can spend on gathering the news and distributing its newspapers, the amount it can spend on journalists, paper, ink, printing presses, delivery trucks, advertisements, and so on." Do you think the New York Times would be content with this?
The analogy he gives of the New York Times is faulty because the articles that the New York Times write doesn't influence our laws in the same way that the politicians who are elected influence our laws. So if you have unlimited amounts of money being spent on the campaign of someone who's running for Senate, let's say they get in, they are obligated to pass laws that benefit their donors. And if you look at the voting records of individuals in Congress, and then if they look at individuals in the House and the Senate, this holds true. Mike Lee, for example, when he claims that the solution to climate change is to have more babies, then you look on opensecrets.org, and one of his biggest campaign donors is the oil and gas industry. This isn't a coincidence.
No, the Times would strenuously object. It would say, money is indispensable for making our speech effective. That is true, and not just for the Times. Without ample money, no congressional candidate can speak to an entire congressional district. And no Senate candidate can communicate to an entire state. And no presidential candidate can make his or her case to our continental nation. Contributing to candidates is one of the most common forms of political participation. So, restricting campaign contributions reduces participation. The only constitutional way.
Claiming that donating to political campaigns is that one of the biggest forms of political participation is interesting. It makes it appear at this point as if conservatives actually view political participation as a great thing. Some of them might, but understand Mitch McConnell said that a federal voting holiday would be a Democratic power grab. With some of the voter suppression tactics that have been going on the last couple of years, you really believe that the people funding this video are concerned about making sure that the average person has their voice heard and that everyone's participating in our political system. I like how they show an individual donating money. They should show as a massive corporation. They should show Koch Industries, or they should show Amazon. They should show these massive corporations that give obscene amounts of money to politicians funding their campaigns. But no, instead they show just an average guy giving money to a political candidate.